Okay, good afternoon everyone. So we are continuing our ROMER seminar series with a guest, special guest from Hacettepe University. It's our pleasure to host, and it's my pleasure, extra pleasure, to introduce Erkut Erdem, who is a close friend and colleague. Erkut Erdem is a professor in the Department of Computer Engineering at Hacettepe University, Ankara, and is co-affiliated with the Quiz AI Center. He earned his PhD from Middle East Technical University, our department, and did his postdoctoral studies at Telecom Paris Tech in France. He is one of the founding members of the Hacettepe University Computer Vision Laboratory. His research focuses on developing powerful methods to understand and manipulate visual data, with a special emphasis on using additional modalities such as language as complementary tools. In recognition of his contributions, he received the Outstanding Young Scientist Award, GEBİP, if you know, from the Turkish Academy of Sciences, and was recently awarded funding from the TÜBİTAK National Outstanding Researchers Program. He also serves as an associate editor for a prestigious journal, the IEEE Transactions on Multimedia. And we are looking forward to an interesting topic. The scene is yours.
Okay. Thank you for this invitation. So today I'm mainly discussing our own journey on multimodal AI. In fact, while my PhD, I mainly studied computer vision. So by nature, I'm a computer vision researcher. But especially like 12 to 13 years ago, we started to work on multimodal AI, and we started to combine both natural language processing and computer vision. And today I'll be mainly discussing both our previous efforts and some recent studies. But before starting my talk, I just want to emphasize that today I'll be mainly discussing our research with my colleague and my twin brother, Erkut. He was previously at Hacettepe University. He is now in Koç University. And we always say that we have now two separate branches, an Ankara branch at Hacettepe University and an Istanbul branch in Koç University. And unofficial name of our group is called the Cyberiyat. If you know, it's like a very nice science fiction story by Stanisław. So what is generative AI? So of course, when we are talking about AI machine learning, most of the previous efforts was on developing some discriminative models. So image classification is one key problem. Given an image like that, we want to develop some methods that can classify this image into some semantic class, like this is a cat image. And of course, for doing that, we need to model this posterior probability. On the other hand, in the generative modeling, we just consider like a kind of reverse direction. So from the some either conditioning vectors like that, like this class, we want to find out some likelihoods or some data priors, so that from that we can generate some novel instances. And for that, of course, we are generally using a collection of data. So for this model that generates cat images, we need to train that model on lots of cat images. So in that sense, once we train that image over a collection of these images, we can generate photorealistic looking. So this is the basic aim, photorealistic images. Of course, the previous slide was on like a conditional generative model. We provide a condition, a class label, and from that we want to generate the final image. But in most general manner, when we are talking about generative modeling, we are mainly talking about learning some approximate data distributions. So these distributions could model images, could model text, or any other modalities such as audio or speech signals. And within that, of course, once we learn these approximate data distributions, we actually understand the underlying hidden structure of these images. So we try to understand, for instance, what makes an image a cat image. And once we learn these data approximate data distributions through the use of a model that we named generator, we can then perform some sampling operation over this data distribution and generate some, again, photorealistic looking images. Of course, this is a very hard task if you simply consider the overall dimension of a natural image. The model needs to understand these hidden latent structures and then combine them to generate these kind of nice looking images. So this is, in a sense, a very hard problem. As I said, nowadays we also have some conditional generative models. As the most popular application is text-based image synthesis. So if you use OpenAI's DALL-E model or Stable Diffusion, you provide a textual description, and the model then generates an image that is in line with the provided target description. So this is like a kind of special case of this generative AI, but I can say it's the most popular one. Of course, the recent progress is very astounding. But if we examine the overall evolution of these deep models, we can see that the early efforts generates like a very low resolution, not that photorealistic looking result. So this is like the initial image generated by this generative adversarial networks. But as you see over here, just within a few years, we were able to generate photorealistic looking images like this one. So this is just one example of a generative model, but we also have other kinds of generative models as well. So for instance, this is again the evolution of the variational autoencoders. Again, you see a similar pattern over here. So starting with the low resolution, low quality images. Conference where we developed our own deep learning based model for this Turkish image captioning problem. So these problems are important because with this we are combining these two different modalities, visual modality with the language. So to generate descriptions like that, the model needs to understand the images, the scene elements and their interactions, and then use them to generate a meaningful description as listed here. But after we started this problem, image captioning, we observed that we are not just limited with this problem. So there are really nice other interesting problems within this setting as well. And again, in 2018, we developed our the first benchmark data set for assessing the performance of these multimodal models that we name as recipe QA. And in this setting, again, we have images and related textual data. In fact, we collected our data from this instructables.com, where we focus on only the recipes. Again, using these recipes is important. It provides a kind of procedural knowledge, so you have these different steps. And from that, we collected 20K different recipes. And from that, we develop our benchmark considering 4 different types of questions. So let me just briefly go over each one of those question types. So for instance, one type is called the visual clause. So we have a textual recipe like that one. So it's like a very long. And for some of the steps, we have the associated images. So this is like a very short recipe in the corresponding, but again, it's like a very long text summarizing what you need to do for instance, for preparing this bacon sushi. Okay. And in this visual clause question, what we did is that we know that each step is associated with these images. So we just randomly select 4 those images from different steps. And this gives us a kind of procedural visual description of the corresponding recipe. So these are like from the succeeding recipes. And from that, we just select one of the images and asked the models to find out the correct image among the other competing images. Similarly, we have a text clause type question. This time, instead of images, we have the input is in the form of a multimodal setting where we have these images and textual data. And this time, we try to find out this missing step over, again, these multiple choices. Another question type is coherence question, where again we have these recipes, and from that we have a sequence of images, and this time we let the model to select an incoherent image within the provided sequence of images. And this one, this is it. And lastly, we have like this ordering type question. Again, from that we have these images with certain numberings, and we let the model find out the true ordering of these images after reading out the corresponding recipe. And back then, in 2018, of course, there were not such many multimodal models. We developed our own models and maybe apply some existing approaches to that problem. And we observed that those models are really bad at understanding the recipes, in other words, understanding this multimodal data. Okay. But this was one of the first works that let us think about how we can simply develop these additional benchmark data sets to understand, to assess the performance of these multimodal models. We presented that work in EMNLP 2018, and when we returned back, we came across with an article in MIT Technology Review, where they featured our work as one of the 4 the most creative data sets presented in that EMLP conference. Of course, the remaining 3 were from well-known research groups like Google Research, Facebook AI. I don't recall the third one. So this is one such research topic that we interest. So we are trying to understand the capabilities of these multimodal models. But we're also interested in tasks such as some computational photography applications. So, for instance, this is again another research question that in fact I posed in 2017 when I was applying for GEBIP. And here I tackled this problem of instruction-based image in painting. So we have given an image like that, and this is the instruction, so remove the dog on the right. And we want the model to simply process the instruction, understand the instruction, process the data, and make the necessary changes over the provided input image. And I'll just return back to this question later on. Another question is this time not for performing these instruction-based manipulation operations, but performing some editing or manipulations over the given case, such as, for instance, making the dresses as yellow. Of course, when I was providing this image, I used Photoshop to perform these results. But just after that, within our research group, we started to work on especially the second problem, semantic image editing problem. And again, back then, there were not that many research groups tackling with these kind of problems. Just a year later, with my former MS student, Mehmet, we developed our own method for performing these semantic image edits, like a GAN-based model, where we use, again, an instruction or like a target textual description to make the necessary edits over the provided image. Of course, this was 2018. The generative models are not that capable of. So as you see here, the results are of low quality in the sense that the resolutions are not that good. But if you simply check the related target descriptions, you can easily see that the model is capable of, for instance, changing the color of the clothes, even perform some structural changes based on the provided descriptions. This is another example from, again, the Fashion Gen dataset. Again, the resolution is not that good, but you can easily see that the model understands the target description and perform the necessary changes over the given case. Of course, this is not like a fully accurate result in the sense that while performing this change, for instance, it also makes the hair a bit short. Okay. This is again another example demonstrating these capabilities. So Later on, in 2020, with our former PhD student Levent, we tackled with this semantic image editing problem, but this time, instead of focusing on just person images, we focused on landscape images, and we simply tried to understand whether we were perform similar kind of edits on the provided images. And once we published our work, the preprint of our work in arXiv, MIT CSAI lab just tweeted our work demonstrating the capabilities of these generative models. And of course, like it's a really nice news for us. But for that, we just consider like a two-step structure. So the main idea is, given an image like that and some target descriptions, we want to perform these necessary edits. So in that sense, in the first step, we try to develop a model which just hallucinates or dreams about what that scene looks like under the provided target descriptions. And once these images are generated, or this image is generated, then we just use an existing style transfer network to transfer the style of this hallucinated image on the provided source image. And we got pretty good results. So this is the input image. And for instance, this is what that scene looks like, where we increase the value of the snow attribute. This is what the scene looks like at night. And this is like in a cloudy spring day. So these are our previous efforts in this AI. Of course, today I just want to talk about our more recent efforts in this area. And again, just like the previous cases, I divided my talk into two parts. The first part will be about this image synthesis or image editing part, and the second part will be about our benchmarking efforts on the multimodal models. So very recently, we presented this HyperGAN clip model in SIGGRAPH Asia last year, where we tried to develop like a unified framework that is capable of performing different kinds of generation and manipulation tasks. So again, here what we focus on is, again, a pre-trained generative adversarial network. So let's focus. We have a GAN model which is trained over a very large collection of human faces. The problem that we tackle is that can we develop a model that can simply transform that model for some new domains. So this is the domain adaptation of the GAN model. Similarly, within that same framework, we can perform some reference-based image editing and some text-based image manipulation operations as well. And here, what we actually did is that we simply have this GAN model. So this is the pre-trained model. So we use a hypernetwork module to modulate the parameters of this network to simply learn some new parameters so that the new model is capable of performing a domain adaptation or a reference-based image editing or text-based editing operation. And here, the key idea behind training this model, apart from this new architecture, is of course the training losses. So I don't know whether you heard before, but OpenAI has this clip model, which is again another multimodal self-supervised model, which learns a common semantic space for both images and text. So here we use the capabilities of this clip model to define certain loss functions to simply let the new model perform these different tasks: domain adaptation, reference-based image editing, and this text-based image manipulation. So this is, again, a domain adaptation result. By the way, in our case, we just use a single image from a target domain. But within our framework, we are capable of manipulating this pre-trained GAN architecture for multiple different domains. So previously, there were some efforts, but those studies require to train separate GAN models for each one of those target domains. So for instance, this is an example. this is the source image, this is the target domain, an image demonstrating the target domain. And within our framework, once we learned these model parameters through the use of this hyper network module, we were able to transform the source image into the corresponding target domain. We also perform similar analysis over the cat images or some wild animal images as well. So for that, we use a pre-trained cat GAN model and adapt them for different wild animals. And here you see the results of the computing approach. As I said, some of those models require separate models for each one of those models. So the main advantage is that we can simply use that with a single GAN model. And of course, we perform some quantitative analysis as well, using a series of quantitative metrics such as FID, diversity, and the quality, overall quality. And as you see, our model is pretty good at performing this domain adaptation. But as I said, in our work, we can also perform reference-guided synthesis as well by training our model on this time just a series of human images. And with that, just like this domain adaptation, we can provide a target image and let the model perform the necessary changes over the source image to get an image which looks like the target image. And here you see the quantitative comparisons with the existing methods. Again, here we are using the same framework. We only change slightly our loss functions, and the whole framework is the same. And again, from a quantitative point of view, again, we got pretty good results. And the nice thing with the use of this clip is that once you train your model on some clip encoders, you can use textual descriptions instead of providing a target image. So even we did not use any textual data during training of this model. Due to the ability of this clip model, we can perform this text-guided image manipulation result as well. So for instance, here you see how this model performs these necessary changes by providing this textual description, Elsa from Frozen. So the model performs the necessary edits over the given image. Of course, in the literature, there are a series of models that performs this task. In fact, this clip inverter was our early work on that, which we presented in SIGGRAPH Asia 2023. But as listed here, most of these studies requires textual data during the training process. So I believe the only exception is this delta edit model. And here you can see the results over the given case. So even we do not use any textual descriptions, our results are pretty good in that regard. So up until now, I talk about images and language, but we are also considering some additional modalities as well. So this is another recent work from our research group, where this time we tackle with the problem from a different viewpoint, in the sense that instead of textual descriptions, we suggest to use some input audio signals, so that from the provided target audio, we try to generate the corresponding images. And here you see the training procedure of this model. It's again a diffusion-based model instead of a GAN-based model, as in this hyper-GAN clip model. And here we consider a two-step training procedure, where in the first step, we try to learn how to map an existing audio, the features from an existing audio encoder to the textual space of the stable diffusion model by using a contrastive loss-based function. And once we learn how to map those two different modalities into the same common semantic space, in the next step, we consider a conditional diffusion model. Again, we are simply extended a pre-trained StyGAN model for the given case. So if you, for instance, focus on this first step, here we develop this transformation network, which performs this transformation from the audio domain to the provided the domain of the clip space. And then in the second step, we use this pre-trained projector model to even perform the necessary training procedure over the provided case. So we include this additional cross-attention layers in between these attention layers. And the nice thing is that since the pre-trained model that we used is built upon textual descriptions, our model is also able to consider additional optional input text while the generation process as well. And once we train this image synthesis model guided by the provided audio, we can also perform this time an audio-driven image editing as well. Given an image, we at first map that image into the corresponding noise space of the diffusion model, and then by providing the target descriptions, we guide the corresponding denoising operation so that we get the changes, the necessary changes over the provided image. So let me at first show some results over this image generation. So let me just open the hour. So this is the input audio for this first image. So you see, listen to like a sound of these water drills. It's not clearly visible, but here the audio includes someone stepping over some fields in a snowy day. This time the audio is just like a simple wind audio. And lastly, we have this wave sounds. And as you see here, the model is capable of understanding the semantics of these input auditory signals and then synthesize these nice-looking results. Of course, as I said, we can also perform editing over the provided input images as well. So for instance, for this input image, when we provide like a water bubbling kind of audio, we simply get this image. Another example, this time you hear fire cracking sound, and then you see that these woods started to fire. And here you see a sound that someone is just hitting over a cardboard. And here, again, the model understands that and makes the necessary changes. Of course, not perfect. It introduces this additional like carpet-like structure over here. But apart from that, the model is capable of changing the wooden structure into this cardboard-like structure. And our quantitative analysis, again, demonstrates that our work is really good at performing both these synthesis and editing tasks as well. Okay. So I shared with you our earlier research question on instruction-based image manipulation or instruction-based object removal, which was dated back into 2017. Luckily, just like after 6 years that we posed that question, we were able to develop a model which can perform that object removal task. And in fact, this is like a collaborative project from Ayşegül Hoca's group at Bilkent University. And we name our model as Inst in Paint. So here, just to remind you, the main task is given an input image and instruction that is just highlighting the object of interest that you want to remove from the provided input image. So for instance, for this example, here the lamp at the left of the large headboard. So for instance, here you see that the model is capable of removing that one.
But the light remains.
Yeah, of course, it's not that perfect. So the shadow, so this requires, nowadays another popular term in generative AI is world modeling. So for instance, this example is a really good example that you need to have like a really nice world model so that once you take some object from the corresponding scene, you should see the after effects of that. That's like a good catch. Of course, for that, our main effort is to develop a data set to train our model. In fact, this data set was mainly developed by initially, in the initial version, was developed by some undergraduate students from Hacettepe University, where we use an existing data set called GQA, which is built upon the visual genome data set, where we have some bounding boxes over some objects of interest, and we also have these scene graphs demonstrating the relations between the provided scene elements. So we just select an object from the corresponding scene graph and extract the segmentation masks from the provided bounding box, and from that we extract after extracting the instance segmentation, we use an existing in-painting method which requires this additional binary masks to specify the locations of the objects that you want to remove to get these results. Of course, this is not like a perfect way of obtaining these cases, but again, this is like one of the ways of doing so. And once we, of course, develop or obtain this data set, in the next case, again, we use a diffusion-based model, where, again, we use additional instruction within the provided cross-attention model and train our diffusion model to perform the provided tasks. And here you see some examples of this instant paint method. Again, this is like a really hard task because, again, the model needs to understand the semantics of the instruction, identify the location, the position of the objects of interest. And after even that, you need to simply make the scene like a realistic as this one. Okay. So again, these are some additional examples demonstrating how we perform these changes. Of course, in the literature, there are a couple of works which can be adapted for this task as well, but once we compare them, we observe that our method is really good at this object removal task. So you can, again, easily see some examples. So for instance, this again, another example, you remove the airplane, but again, you simply keep the corresponding class as well. Again, for instance, these cases, no other method exists, but again, here you observe the shadow of the object. So this is again like a shortcoming of the existing models. And since we have these cross-attention layers, we can also analyze the attention maps so that how we can interpret the inner workings of this model. So for instance, here the task is removing the flying kite at the right, and you can easily see that the model focus on the corresponding part of the object. Again, here, remove the person at the center. The model identifies the person and then performs the removal tasks. Okay, so these were for the first part, this semantic image editing, image synthesis part. As I said, we are also interested in developing these benchmarks. And this study, WINMA, was again a very collaborative work covering a lot of institutions. And this work was presented in iClear last year, where we tackled this time a benchmark data set for understanding the capabilities of the video language models. So, as I said, large language models have developed throughout the years, but again, if you examine the overall evolution of these models, you can easily see that the current trend is to improve the capabilities of these models by including some additional modalities, such as understanding the images, understanding the video, understanding the text, etc., etc. And when we examine the whole literature on these vision language models, again, we can easily see that these models, again, were pre-trained over, like in a self-supervised manner, over a very large video text data, but they were just tested on some downstream tasks, such as activity recognition, video question answering, etc., etc. So we are in the study mainly tackled with the problem of, do these multimodal models actually learn solutions so that we can simply, these models can generalize across different tasks and generate. So in that sense, here we are just considering a zero-shot evaluation setting. We do not perform any fine-tuning. And of course, for that, we simply considered a foiling-based approach from this study called WALS, where the main tasks involve, given a video clip like that, we provided these models two different textual description. One is the ground truth description, and the other one is that we name as the foil, which just considers some minimal differences between the original descriptions. And in that sense, we just let these models to understand the accurate descriptions among the corresponding foils. And in fact, we have two separate tasks in this WINMA study. In the first task, this proficiency test, we try to test the basic capabilities of some of the essential things to solve the main task. So for instance, if the task is understanding the actions over the given cases, the model needs to at first understand the objects of interest. So this first proficiency test simply checks whether this is the case. And in the second case, we have the main test. And in that sense, we consider separate different tasks such as action counting, situation awareness, change of state, rare actions, spatial relations. And for that, each one of those cases, we have unique foiling functions and unique proficiency tasks. So let me show you some examples from our benchmark dataset. So this is an example for the action counting case. As you see here, this is the proficiency test, which simply identifies whether the models understand the actual activity or not, like someone is lifting the weights or swims by performing strokes or not. And in the second case, in the main task, we simply consider, for instance, the counting operation. Someone lifts the weights once or 10 times. And these are the samples within the given cases. In situational awareness, the task is mainly for recognizing the actors, the actions between the actions and the relations between these actors. So, in that sense, the roles of the actors, such as, for instance, in the given cases, a person suddenly opens or locks the door. Again, we try to find out, let the models to find out the accurate textual description. Another task is for understanding the change of the states. So we let the models to recognize and distinguish different subphases of the actions. So for instance, if you look at here the task requires understanding the final state of this action. At the end, the cup is empty or full. And we have these rare actions, which includes like some rare cases that we think that these models, while this pre-training step actually did not encode it so many times, but let the model try to understand these novel compositions of the actions and the corresponding case. And lastly, we have this spatial relations, such as the model needs to understand the spilling water onto or from a plant. And of course, for that, the proficiency task involves understanding the actual object of interest. So this is the related video. And I can say that most of the efforts while developing this benchmark is constructing the foils. So the task should not be that easy, should not be that hard, and include the accurate descriptions. So for that, again, we use some existing language models and simply test their grammatical correctness and some natural language inference properties. But apart from that, we also consider some crowdsourcing experiments, use Amazon Mechanical Turkers to simply annotate the data, so that we should be sure that the foils are actually the inaccurate response for the provided case. And we test like lots of video language models. We also consider some image language models where we just consider like the center frame over the provided video sequence and some random baselines. And the results that we got shows us really interesting observations. Of course, as I said, nowadays we have much more stronger video language models, but back then, the first observation that we have is that the video language models are actually no better than their image language counterparts. So as demonstrated over here, these language-based models are pretty good at identifying the correct descriptions as opposed to the voice. So in that sense, we are not actually sure whether these models really have the temporal reasoning capabilities or not. And the second observation is that when we have the related proficiency task, we observe that maybe some models perform gives the correct answer for the main task, but it fails on the proficiency or vice versa. So in the sense that these models sometimes predict correct answers simply by chance or by simply due to the reliance on some spurious features. And lastly, I want to talk about another benchmarking effort that we name as Compact, which was presented in last year's NUCL conference, where this time we mainly focused on understanding the compositional generalization abilities of these multimodal models. I don't know whether you are familiar with this compositional generalization, but the main task is that we try to consider some Naive combinations of some atomic structures and let the models actually have with these kind of generalization abilities. And there are some studies demonstrating that the existing deep learning models are not really successful at this compositional generalization tasks. So in other words, in this compact study, our main goal is to understand the contribution of the multimodality for the sequential compositional generalization task. So we try to understand whether using these complementary modalities can help the models for improving their compositional generalization abilities. And for that, again, we collected or we created our own data set. This time we use this Epic Kitchens dataset as our main source. So this data set includes 10 hours of video with text and audio signals, and includes some household tasks. So it's like egocentric video sequence. And from those videos, we extracted these multimodal sequences. And as I said, the nice thing with this data set, we also have this accompanying the audio signals as well. So in the corresponding solution, so let me just go over the given cases. We are again focusing on this compositional generalization. So the data set that we created should have this ability. So for that, what we are actually aiming for is that maybe for each one of those sequences, we have very simple actions. And for each action, we have an object of interest. So if you look at over here, in our training and test splits and validation splits, the distribution of these atoms are like the same. Okay, so this means that our model observes these individual atoms, actions, or objects during the training procedure. But for the compositional setting, what we did is that in our test split, we let the model to simply understand some novel compositions of these atomic structures. So you can easily see that the distribution of the test and validation data is totally different than the training data. And for that, of course, we consider some strategies to get these data splits. And at the end, we end up with that many multimodal sequences. In these sequences, we have approximately 3,000 unique atoms involving objects or some actions, and that many unique compositions of them. And you can easily see that we can have these different categories. And to understand this compositional generalization task, we consider two separate tasks. The first task is this next utterance prediction task. We let the model to observe these 3 frames from the provided video sequence, an image, a text, and maybe some additional audio signals as well. So, and then from that, we try to let the model predict the next utterance. And again, just to emphasize, these utterances are novel in the sense that they were not observed during the training. Yes, the model may be observed this pour action and the pasta, but never observed this pour pasta as an action. And the second task is called this action anticipation task, where again, either text, audio, or input images, we provided these 3 separate frames. And then in the next phase, instead of predicting the next utterance, we just try to predict either the verb or the provided noun. And we tested a couple of models, text-only models, vision language models, object and language models, where we use the ground truth object information, audio language models, audio and vision language models, object audio language models, some pre-trained multimodal models like Llama 2, IDFX, OpenFlamingo, etc. And we also develop our own multimodal and single modality models as well. So this is like the multimodal audio vision language model that we consider. So we have this cross-attention models, and from that we train our model. And when we examine the results for the next utterance prediction results, we observe that using, again, generally using these multimodal performs much better than their text-only models, which highlights that for compositional generalization, using this complementary multimodal data is really aiding these models to simply find out the proper next utterances. But again, back then, these multimodal large language models, again, in a few-shot setting, performs really poor on the provided data. For the action anticipation task, for the verb prediction results, again, we observed like a kind of marginal improvements over the multimodal features, which was like a pretty interesting thing, so we expect otherwise. And we observed that generally predicting the verb, the action, is much easier than the predicting the, for instance, the corresponding nouns or the objects in the next actions. So today, I simply summarize our own research journey throughout the corresponding years on this multimodal AI. Again, we started with working on some vision and language tasks, but as you saw today, we are not just limited with these just 2 modalities. There are other modalities, interesting modalities that can be simply embedded into these multimodal AI setting. And apart from developing these models, we also think that developing some benchmarks to assess the performance of these multimodal models is really important. So that's why we are simply focusing on that part as well. And of course, as I listed over here, we have other very promising works that are now currently in our ovens, and we simply hope that we'll present them later on. So thanks for your attention.